The Galactic Council sat in its ancient chamber, a vast, spherical hall suspended in the heart of a synthetic star. The air was thick with the murmurs of the delegates, each species more different from the other than one could imagine. The Exelnari, with their 6 delicate, insect-like legs and shimmering, translucent wings, sat in one section. The Krath, large biomechanical beings that towered above the others, occupied another. And then there were the T-Kalna, their shimmering, crystalline skin glowing in the dim light, their eyes reflecting centuries of wisdom. Despite their differences, they all shared a common purpose to maintain the fragile peace of the galaxy. But today there was an unease that hadn't been felt in generations. A topic was on the table that stirred old wounds and sparked deep divisions: humanity. "I don't understand why we are still discussing this, Nara," a delegate from the Exelnari said, her antennae twitching as her voice grew sharp. "Every time we involve humans in our conflicts, it ends in catastrophe." The chamber fell silent. Every eye turned toward her, some filled with frustration, others with curiosity. Nara had been one of the most vocal critics of humanity's influence in galactic affairs, especially in the wake of their intervention in the Krath-Katharn War. The war had been brutal, lasting decades, until the humans had unexpectedly entered the fray. They had brokered a peace agreement with the same swift and brutal decisiveness that marked their approach to most problems. The problem, however, was that the peace had come at a cost. The Krath and Katharn had been forced to the negotiating table under threat of human military intervention, and neither side had been willing to truly reconcile. "I agree with Naragorath," the grizzled Threxian general growled, his deep voice reverberating in the chamber. "I've fought alongside many races in my time, but every time humanity intervenes, it's like watching a storm. It doesn't care who it destroys, it only cares about its own outcome. They don't know peace, they know destruction." Nara nodded. "Exactly. We are a council of peacekeepers, a council that values compromise, understanding, and mutual respect. But the humans, they approach diplomacy as if it were an arena for their own strength. They see all problems as nails because they have the hammer of their military might." A soft, almost imperceptible chuckle rippled from the T-Kalna delegate, Yilran. His species, a race of calm and calculating diplomats, had always been intrigued by the humans' unorthodox methods. "What you see as reckless, Nara, I see as decisive. What you call destruction, I call resolution. Humans don't hesitate where we may falter. Their interference may seem chaotic, but it brings results." "You call it resolution," Nara shot back, her voice growing louder. "But the cost is always too high. Look at the Axianara War. Humanity's involvement turned it from a localized conflict into a full-scale disaster. Their so-called resolution nearly wiped out an entire species." "True," Yilran said, his tone still measured. "But the Axianara were not innocent in their aggression. Humanity didn't intervene out of malice. They intervened to stop a genocide. And after the war, the Axianara, what was left of them, found a way to rebuild, to integrate into galactic society once again. Their people survived, something that would not have happened without humanity's intervention." "You think they care about survival?" Nara retorted. "Humanity doesn't care for the cost of survival. They care only for their own definition of what's right." The room hummed with the sound of shifting opinions. The debate was becoming more intense, with both sides digging in their heels. But the one thing everyone could agree on was that humanity's impact on the galaxy had been profound and terrifying. They were unpredictable, reckless, and, at times, terrifyingly efficient. The Krath had learned that lesson the hard way. The Katharn had learned it too, though they were slower to accept it. Now, even as they bickered over the implications, everyone knew that the galaxy was no longer in control of its own destiny. Humanity had arrived, and the Council could no longer ignore the fact that their intervention, for better or worse, would shape the future. The question was no longer if they would be involved in galactic wars, but how much more destruction would come in their wake. At the edge of the galaxy, humanity's greatest test was unfolding. The Gorthian Alliance, a fierce and aggressive collective of warlike species, had begun to raid human colonies with increasing frequency. Initially, the attacks had seemed like isolated incidents, pirate raids, the kind of skirmishes humanity had dealt with before. But this time, the assaults were different. They were organized, methodical, and brutal. Entire human colonies, once thriving, were left in ruins, with no clear reason or provocation for such an escalation. General Marcus Blake stood in the war room aboard the flagship Defender, staring at the holoscreen, his sharp eyes scanning the images of the latest Gorthian raid. The images showed the burning remains of a colony on the planet Varnus, a peaceful farming world. The survivors had sent out a distress call moments before their transmissions had gone silent. The horror was clear. The Gorthians were no longer content with minor raids. They were targeting the heart of humanity's reach. "Sir, we've intercepted another transmission from Gorthian Space," Lieutenant Zara Trenton said, breaking the silence. "It's a direct threat to human sovereignty. They've promised more attacks unless we submit to their demands." Blake's jaw tightened as he looked down at the data. The Gorthians were demanding tribute, something that humanity had never bowed to, not after the days of their colonial oppression. In Blake's eyes, that was an insult to the entire human race. He knew humanity's history too well. They had fought for their independence, for their right to govern themselves, and they would not be cowed by a foreign power, no matter how strong or ancient. "Prepare the fleet," Blake ordered, his voice low but resolute. "We're not going to stand down. We're going to show them exactly why they made a mistake targeting us." His voice carried the weight of decades of human perseverance. The United Earth Fleet was one of the most formidable forces in the galaxy, and its military might had only grown since the early days of human exploration. What began as a species on the brink of extinction had transformed into a powerhouse that could face down threats from any corner of the galaxy. And Blake knew that this particular threat, the Gorthians would learn that lesson the hard way. "We'll give them one chance to reconsider," Blake continued, his gaze hardening. "If they don't, we'll make sure they regret ever crossing into human space." The decision was made. Within hours, the United Earth Fleet was mobilized, jump gates flaring open as massive warships, led by the Defender, set course for Gorthian space. General Blake stood on the bridge, the hum of the ship's engines vibrating beneath his feet, feeling the gravity of the situation settle into him. He was a soldier, a leader. His responsibility was to protect humanity, no matter the cost. As the fleet entered Gorthian space, Blake's eyes narrowed. The Gorthians were a highly advanced race, their ships constructed from organic materials and capable of astounding feats of speed and weaponry. They were not to be taken lightly, but humanity had always fought smarter, not just harder. The first wave of human ships arrived near the outer rim of the Gorthian sector, and Blake issued his orders with precision. "Strike fast. No hesitation. We make it clear that we won't tolerate these attacks any longer," Blake instructed, his voice calm but cold. "We show them the price of underestimating us." Moments later, the Defender and its fleet of warships engaged the Gorthian armada in a rapid and brutal confrontation. The humans, with their laser-accurate targeting systems and relentless precision, tore through the Gorthian defenses with overwhelming force. Their ships darted in and out of combat, using their superior maneuverability to strike where the enemy was weakest. Blake watched from the command center as the battle raged. Gorthian ships exploded in flashes of blue and orange, and human fleets moved with a terrifying coordination that made it clear humanity was not a species to be trifled with. The Gorthians fought back with desperation, but their tactics, although fierce, lacked the cohesion and strategic depth that the humans had mastered. Their military, while powerful, was disjointed compared to the precision of humanity's coordinated strikes. As the battle reached its peak, the Gorthians sent out an emergency distress signal, their communications crackling with static. The humans had already won. The Gorthians were retreating, unable to sustain their assault against such an overwhelming and well-organized force. But even as the battle ended, Blake knew this was only the beginning. The Gorthians would not simply disappear, and their defeat would likely lead to new threats. However, one thing was now certain: humanity was not afraid to defend itself, and anyone who sought to test them would learn that lesson the hard way. In the aftermath of the battle, Blake stood at the helm of his ship, staring out at the remains of the Gorthian fleet drifting in space. He allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction, but in the back of his mind, he knew this wouldn't be the last time humanity had to fight for its place in the galaxy. As long as threats like the Gorthians existed, humanity would continue to prove that no one could challenge them without consequences. The aftermath of the Gorthian raid was still unfolding when the message reached the Galactic Council. The news spread through the chamber like wildfire, igniting a wave of concern that rippled across every race in the room. Humanity's swift and brutal retaliation had shaken the galaxy. The Gorthian fleet, once a fearsome force, was now a scattered remnant, and the Gorthians, as fierce as they were, had no choice but to pull back. For many, the speed with which the humans had responded and the devastating efficiency of their tactics was both impressive and terrifying. A council meeting was called immediately, and the delegates, from all corners of the galaxy, gathered in their usual places. The holographic displays flickered to life, showing the damaged remains of Gorthian ships, the debris fields, and the wreckage of planets that had been caught in the conflict. The message was clear: humanity was not to be underestimated. "I told you, Nara," the XL-Nari diplomat said bitterly as she stood up, her 6 delicate limbs bracing her for the argument to come. "This is what happens when you let humans into your wars. They don't follow our rules. They don't care about diplomacy or restraint. They act with the same recklessness that has been their hallmark since they first entered the galactic stage." Her words were met with murmurs of agreement, though not from everyone. Yilran, the T-Kalna representative, shook his head. "You are missing the point, Nara. Humans may act decisively, but they also act with purpose. In the case of the Gorthian Alliance, their swift response has put an end to a very real threat. The Gorthians were becoming a serious danger to our stability, and humanity, whether you like it or not, has prevented further escalation." "But at what cost?" Nara retorted, her voice rising. "Do you honestly think the Gorthians are going to simply let this go? They will retaliate, and it will escalate into something far worse than what we've seen so far." Humanity's response was swift, yes, but it was also destructive. They didn't seek a peaceful resolution, they imposed their will through sheer force. Gorath, the Threxian general, shifted in his seat, his massive frame causing the floor to tremble slightly. "The problem with your argument, Nara, is that humanity doesn't need our permission to act. And whether we like it or not, they've proven that they can handle themselves in ways we can only admire. They didn't waste time with negotiations or delicate diplomacy. They did what needed to be done." "But that's the issue," Nara shot back. "They don't see diplomacy as something worth their time. They only see the problem in terms of power. That's how they approach everything. And now we've opened a Pandora's box. Once you allow humans to settle their own conflicts with violence, there's no telling where it might lead." There was a long, heavy silence that followed Nara's words. For many of the delegates, the Gorthian conflict had been a wake-up call. Humanity's actions, though successful, had crossed a line. They had acted without restraint, and in doing so, had demonstrated the lengths they were willing to go to protect their interests. The question now was how far that willingness would extend. Yilran was the next to speak, his voice measured but firm. We cannot afford to ignore what has happened. Humanity's methods are unconventional, yes, but they are effective. The question we must ask ourselves is this: can we afford to push them further? Can we afford to stand in opposition to a species capable of such decisive action? We cannot be intimidated, Nara argued, but there was a trace of uncertainty in her tone. If humanity continues to act as it did with the Gorthians, there will be no room for diplomacy, no room for peaceful coexistence. The Gorthians didn't want peace, Yilran replied, his eyes narrowing slightly. They made their intentions clear. And humanity responded in kind. We cannot fault them for protecting their own. But we must also recognize that humanity will not always be the one to escalate conflict. Sometimes we may need them to stand beside us, not just against us. The council chamber hummed with a mix of apprehension and reluctant agreement. It was clear that humanity's role in the galaxy had shifted dramatically. No longer were they a species on the fringe, struggling for survival in a vast, hostile universe. They were now a force to be reckoned with, and their actions had already begun to reshape the balance of power in ways the council had not anticipated. And though the delegates could not yet agree on how to move forward, one thing was certain: the days of humanity being a mere bystander in galactic affairs were over. The question was no longer if humanity would intervene, but when, and with what consequences. The galaxy had learned, for better or worse, that humanity would no longer shy away from conflict. It was time for the council to decide: were they ready to accept the changes humanity was bringing, or would they try to control them, with all the risks that entailed? The war had already begun, though the galaxy had not yet fully grasped the scale of what it meant. Humanity's swift retaliation against the Gorthians had sent ripples of fear and admiration throughout the galaxy. The council's debates had become more urgent, more fractious, but they had not yet found consensus on how to handle the rising power that was humanity. Their intervention, once thought of as a singular event, had now become a catalyst for the galaxy's inevitable reckoning. General Marcus Blake stood on the command deck of the Defender, staring out into the black void of space. His fleet had just passed the outskirts of Gorthian space, leaving behind a trail of broken vessels and firestorms. The Gorthian threat had been decisively crushed, but Blake's mind was already on the next step. Despite the swift success of the mission, a deep unease gnawed at him. Humanity had crossed a line. The galaxy had seen the might of the United Earth fleet in full force, and though they had won, Blake could sense the tension in the air. Every action had a consequence. The aftermath of this battle was far from over. General, said Zara Trenton, the fleet's tactical officer, breaking his thoughts. We've received a transmission from the Galactic Council. It's urgent. Blake's gaze hardened. But he didn't need to be told that the message wouldn't be one of congratulations. He motioned for Zara to play the transmission, and the room went dark, replaced by the holographic figures of several Galactic Council members. Among them was Nara, the XL-Nari representative, her wings trembling slightly as her antennae swiveled with restrained frustration. Blake had come to recognize her as one of the fiercest critics of humanity's methods. General Blake, Nara began, her voice cool but heavy with accusation. We have convened in response to your recent actions. The destruction of the Gorthian fleet has raised alarms throughout the galaxy. We cannot allow a single species to dictate the balance of power with such reckless abandon. The Gorthians were a threat, yes. But your response has escalated the situation to a point where we are left with no choice but to reconsider your place in galactic affairs. Blake's eyes narrowed. He had expected this, but it still stung. He wasn't one to back down, but he had always believed that humanity's strength would be used for the greater good of the galaxy. He had assumed that others would understand. They had wronged humanity first, and he had done what was necessary to protect his people. The rest of the galaxy didn't seem to see it that way. You are warning me against further action, Blake said calmly, his voice a stark contrast to the brewing tension within him. I have no intention of retreating. Humanity has made its position clear. We will defend ourselves, and if necessary, we will act against any who would threaten our people. The Gorthians chose their path. You misunderstand Yilran, the Tikalna delegate interjected. His voice was smooth and reasoned, but there was an underlying firmness. This is not about the Gorthians. This is about the larger picture. Humanity's intervention was not a single event, it has now become a pattern. The rest of the galaxy is watching you, and they are afraid. What happens when you decide to turn your attention to another species? What happens when you feel a new threat rises? You have demonstrated that you will not hesitate to use your superior power to achieve your goals. The weight of Yilran's words hung in the air. Blake's hand clenched into a fist, but he said nothing. The Council was right in one aspect: humanity's military capabilities were unmatched, and their willingness to act decisively had earned them both respect and fear. But Blake knew that, just as the Gorthians had learned, the galaxy had not yet seen the full potential of what humanity could do. They had not yet realized that humanity was not motivated by conquest, but by protection, by the need to secure their own survival. But how would the galaxy understand that when all they saw was destruction? Blake's thoughts were interrupted by a booming voice from behind him. General, we've received reports of more Gorthian warships regrouping. They're gathering near the Varna sector. Blake turned sharply to face the communications officer. He had expected retaliation, but it was coming faster than he had anticipated. The Gorthians, broken and bruised as they were, had made one critical mistake: they had underestimated humanity's resolve. And now, the galaxy was about to see the consequences of their failure. We'll be ready, Blake replied firmly. Alert the fleet. Prepare for another engagement. As the message from the Council faded and the lights of the war room brightened once more, Blake realized that the battle for humanity's place in the galaxy was only just beginning. They had proven themselves as a force to be reckoned with, but the road ahead would be paved with uncertainty. How would the galaxy respond to their actions? Would they be seen as a force for peace or a threat to the status quo? In the silence that followed, as the hum of the ship filled the air, Blake's thoughts turned to the future. Humanity would not back down, but it was clear that the decisions they made now would define their legacy in the galaxy for generations to come. The atmosphere on the Defender was tense as the human fleet moved into position near the Varna sector. Blake stood at the command deck, his fingers tightly gripping the console as he observed the unfolding situation on the holoscreen. The Gorthian fleet had regrouped faster than anticipated, and the sense of urgency that had gripped him earlier now surged through every officer on the bridge. The entire fleet was at the ready, weapons primed, engines set to full speed. Blake had no illusions about what was coming. This would not be a simple engagement. The Gorthians were wounded, but they were not finished. General, we've got Gorthian signatures coming out of the nebula, Lieutenant Trenton reported, her voice tense. They're deploying reinforcements. It's a full-scale counterattack. Blake's jaw tightened. The Gorthians had regrouped with vengeance in mind. The battle at the edge of their space had been decisive, but their pride had been wounded, and no one knew better than Blake how dangerous a cornered animal could be. He had prepared for retaliation, but the magnitude of it was more than he had expected. The galaxy's delicate balance was hanging by a thread. Deploy the forward strike units, Blake ordered, his voice cutting through the tension. We'll hit them before they have a chance to regroup completely. No hesitation. The fleet, once scattered, now moved with coordinated precision as Blake's orders flowed seamlessly through the chain of command. Every ship knew its role, every captain knew their mission. Humanity had learned to operate as a unified force, each component working together toward a singular goal: victory. But this time, Blake knew the stakes were higher. This was more than just a defense of human space, it was a declaration to the galaxy that humanity would not back down. This was a statement that humanity would fight for its place in the cosmos. As the first human ships streaked toward the Gorthian armada, Blake's mind raced. He had always been a strategist, calculating every move before making it. But this was different. The Council was watching. The galaxy was watching. The consequences of this battle would echo throughout the cosmos. If humanity struck too hard, too decisively, they would be seen as an unstoppable force, a force that would change the dynamics of the entire galaxy. But if they hesitated or showed mercy, it would be seen as weakness, something the galaxy would exploit to test humanity's resolve again and again. Shields at maximum, Blake ordered. Prepare to engage at will. The first blasts of energy erupted from the Gorthian ships as they realized the scale of humanity's approach. Their response was fierce, and their ships moved with unnatural speed, their organic hulls bending and shifting in ways that human vessels could not replicate. But despite their agility, the Gorthians were no match for the sheer firepower of the United Earth Fleet. Humanity's ships, sleek and agile in their own right, moved with precision, firing calculated bursts of energy that shattered Gorthian shields and crippled their hulls. Blake watched as the battle unfolded before him. The Gorthian fleet was no longer the unstoppable force it once was. Their attempts to retaliate were met with devastating force. Blake had prepared for this moment for years, and as each of the Gorthian ships fell one by one, he felt the weight of the decision he had made, the decision to engage. The decision to show the galaxy that humanity would not simply survive, but would thrive. They had earned their place at the table, and they would not allow anyone to take it from them. "General, we've neutralized 40% of their fleet," Trenton reported, her voice calm, but there was no hiding the adrenaline in her words. "They're attempting to break off, but their fleet is in disarray." Blake's lips curled into a thin smile, but it was a grim one. He had known that the Gorthians wouldn't surrender easily. They had underestimated humanity's resolve, and they were paying the price for it now. But Blake also knew that this wouldn't be the end. The Gorthians would retreat, lick their wounds, and rebuild. But humanity had sent a message that would resonate far beyond the battlefield. He stood silent for a moment, staring at the battlefield as the Gorthian fleet, broken and scattered, tried to retreat into the nebula. He knew that this victory would not be the end of humanity's trials. Other threats would emerge. The galaxy would continue to test them, continue to question their methods. But humanity was no longer a fledgling species, scrambling to survive. Humanity was a force in the galaxy, a force that demanded respect. "Signal the fleet to stand down," Blake said, his voice calm but resolute. "We've won today. But this war is far from over." As the fleet began to return to formation, Blake's thoughts drifted to the Council. What would they think of humanity now? Would they accept that the galaxy had changed, or would they continue to resist the undeniable truth? Humanity had arrived, and they were not going anywhere. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity had made its mark, and the galaxy would never be the same again.